Good evening, everyone. It is 6:31, so I will kick off tonight's webinar. And I want to welcome you all to the ongoing National Check-in Week conversations that we're having here from Life Skills Go. I'm Sally Webster. I am the Chief Operations Strategy and Growth Officer, and I'm really glad to be moderating tonight's conversations, the signals we miss, the early identification, student voice, and the science of learning. So tonight isn't a conversation about whether schools care about their students, because we know in the conversations we have with every school teacher and leader that the work that happens in your school gates is very important and definitely is there. This is more specific about what the signals schools already watch closely, such as attendance, behaviour and academic results, and what they tend to tell us when a student's struggling. But what are the data points that we're also seeing in terms of after they're struggling? What's been visible for some time that we don't have visibility of? We do want to talk about what sits underneath those signals. So why student voice matters as an early warning sign in systems in its own right, and what the science of learning actually tells us about what a brain needs before it's ready to take anything in. We'll hear tonight from a cognitive neuroscientist, a school leader, a national voice in children's wellbeing and prevention, and the founder of an Australian platform built to help schools see these signals earlier. This is a really practical conversation that I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panelists this evening. I would also like to start this evening by acknowledging country and the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we are all joining from this evening, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us here as our first storytellers, our knowledge holders, and educators of this country. As we begin tonight's conversation about learning, wellbeing, belonging, and young people's futures, I want to acknowledge the enduring role of our First Nations families, communities, and elders in nurturing our children's wellbeing, identity, and belonging. So a little bit of context, because we're all probably wondering, National Check-in Week, we often think it is just about a week. And on the back of the conversations, as Nikki alluded to just earlier, we really want to continue these conversations and bring the panelists of experts that we work with day in, day out to share practical resources for schools, families, and communities. So while we continue to look at this central question of how do we see young people earlier and understand what they're telling us and respond before those concerns become crises, I guess we're looking tonight on how science and the practice of early identification itself can support teachers and school leaders. So this session really is for all of the school leaders and teachers who have joined us tonight, and we're looking forward to being able to share a lot of the thoughts and experiences that we'll have from Daniel, Karen, Dr. Mark, and Nikki. So a few quick housekeeping points before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be made available through the Life Skills Go and National Check-in Week websites. We want tonight to be interactive, so can we please use the chat to share any reflections or ask any questions? We've got the lovely Marcus, who is our moderator in the chat, and will be working with us behind the scenes to make sure that he can pass those conversations through to us as well. Tonight's going to be more of a fireside panels conversation. For those of you who did join us back in May, you'll hear that we'll ask some questions and have really robust conversation and discussion. And what we're hoping is that some of these conversations will also give you a lot of practical advice, but other things to think about as well. So before we move into the panel and introducing them, I am going to run a little poll with a couple of questions. So you should see two questions appearing now, and there's no right or wrong answers. Simply, they're going to help us make tonight a little bit more relevant in the way we help support everyone. So while you take the opportunity to answer those questions, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So tonight, I'm really privileged to be joined by a panel, as I said, bringing cognitive neuroscience, school leadership, national wellbeing and prevention expertise, and product and founder insight into this conversation. Dr. Mark Williams, OAM, is the Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience. He's the author of The Connected Species and he's a long-standing neuroscience partner to Life Skills Go. His work explains why emotion, attention, and connection cannot be separated from learning, and I'm really excited to hear from some of the things you'll be sharing with us tonight. Daniel Payne is the assistant principal at Shortland Public School. For those of you not familiar with Shortland Public School, it is up in the beautiful Newcastle area here in New South Wales. And he brings that hands-on day-to-day experience of identifying and supporting students, including specialist and support class settings, and really identifying how he can create concerns before they escalate. Didn't say that well, but I'm sure you understood what I was trying to say. Karen Roberts is the CEO of Life Education Australia and Vice President of the Australian Parents Council, with more than 30 years' experience in education leadership, policy and program innovation, and a recognised national voice in children's health and wellbeing. And finally, Nikki Bonus, who is the founder and CEO of Life Skills Go, spending 15 years, we're going to say, and more, working inside schools before founding Life Skills Go, and building the platform hand in hand with more than 1,000 Australian schools. So, how are we going with the panel, the poll? Fabulous. All right. So really we're looking at supporting students, what's currently relying on most: attendance, behaviour, teacher observations, a combination of all. Okay, thank you so very much. And then in terms of what we're also seeing, we'll go through the next components. I'm going to kick off the questions. Oh, thanks so much, Marcus. Appreciate that. I forgot to scroll down. So what's the biggest challenge? Marcus, I'll get you to actually put that into the chat, what we were seeing in terms of the patterns there. So I think people are really excited about hearing on to the questions. So Dr. Mark, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm coming to you first in terms of the question around what the brain needs to learn. So we talk a lot in schools about attendance, behaviour and results. But before any of that, can you share with us really about what does the brain actually need in place before it's ready to learn anything at all?
Yeah, great question, Sally. I think we first need to connect, or the students need to connect with the whoever's doing the teaching, because we know our brains have really got this amazing ability to recognize who they trust and who they don't trust. And they only really learn from people they trust, and they don't learn from people they don't trust. We as humans actually learn really easily, but we need to be in an environment where we feel safe and where we feel as though we can trust the person that is teaching us. And so that's really number one. That is, of course, after you get over mental health issues and food and all of those really low level things that Maslow talks about. But once you get past those, then it really is that connection, which is really, really crucial for learning.
No, thanks. And I know from that perspective, a lot of the ways in terms of, and I'm sure a number of the other teachers far more experienced than I, that trust component really does enable that connection with students in terms of how they sense that they feel that sense of belonging in the classroom with particular teachers. And you do really see how some students flourish from that perspective. And I guess it is, a question to all of us around what is it that we can do to build those trust connections with students in the classroom. So, Dr. Mark, I'll keep you on the hook for a little bit, but Daniel, I'm going to come to you in terms of certainly the work I've been involved with around over the years around departments of education, and that looking at attendance and behaviour and academic performance has really been a big priority of what we often look at in terms of how we assess student performance and learning outcomes and educational attainment. So I guess from your perspective, why is attendance, behaviour, academic performance often the last things to shift rather than the first signs that something's going on with our students?
Yeah, I think, look, from my point of view, working, wellbeing, in a school where we've got 40% Aboriginal, 20% EALD, so quite a complex sort of school setting with 7 inclusive ed classes. I think one of the first things that I notice is that students start to disengage from relationships first. So learning, the attendance, and everything else actually comes after that, like Mark was saying. So I think when students don't feel that they belong or that they're genuinely known or someone believes in them, then the learning becomes much harder. So I think it's really, for schools, it's about creating schools where disengagement is far less likely to occur in the first place. And, if there is some behaviors that we're starting to notice, is what is the behavior trying to tell me in the first place, and getting to the bottom of that before we go any further.
And I guess, in your experience in the work that you're doing in your school, and I know having visited a lot of different schools, what are the kind of programs or the kind of activities that you might do when you start seeing those signs? How do you reach out to individual students or classes collectively?
So, look, we have been using Life Skills Go, which is an identification tool that we do use within the school. So that's obviously something that we can notice patterns and things like that in terms of how students are checking in. But it even goes down to just even away from programs, just simply being present, on the front gate of a morning. How's a student present in the morning? As maybe not a hello or a high five or something like that. So really down to knowing the students, and does every student in the school have someone that they think would notice if they weren't there that day? And I think if they know, anyone that's sort of known, the Department of Education has known, valued, and cared for. I'm not a big slogan person, but I do think that if we can have students who do feel that in every setting, I don't think, and it's the same for staff members, anybody, if you're known, valued, and cared for, you're going to perform much better.
Yeah. Dr. Mark, your thoughts on that from the neuroscience lens?
Yeah, I think Daniel's spot on. And I think like attendance, students stop attending because they don't feel connected to the school, right? They don't feel as though they're welcome at the school, or they don't feel as though that's somewhere that they feel safe, because, a child often stops attending because they've got difficulties usually at home. Something's going on at home, or they're having, some sort of change in their mental status, or change in hormones and those sorts of things. So there's something going on outside of the school, and then they don't feel as though the school is somewhere where they can go and get support for that, and so they don't go to school for that reason. And so when you look at things like attendance and so on, it's usually down to this whole problem with connection, is that they don't feel as though it's somewhere that they can go, and having someone there that they is going to notice when they change. Because we've got to remember that it's not, you can have a child, it's hard just to look at behavior itself, because a child or a student, you could have a student who is very rambunctious, let's say, who's very active and very out there, and they may be fine as far as learning and outcomes and all those are concerned, and then all of a sudden they become shy. Then you've got a problem, right? Because obviously something's happened that's changed their behavior. Or you could have a student who's very shy and then all of a sudden becomes very outward and very noisy and everything in the classroom. And again, there you've got a problem, right? It's the change that happens that we've got to notice. And you're only going to notice those things if you know the individual, or if you're keeping a lot of data on the individuals and know how they respond on a day-to-day basis. So what we need to be looking for is a change to then detect it early, so that then we can do something about it. And that requires, as Daniel said, that requires you to know the children, know the students well, and so when there is a change that actually happens.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really interesting component, because as we saw in the polls coming back, it isn't just about the attendance and behaviour records and incidents that we're logging in, student information systems and so forth. It is really around that classroom observation, as well as all of the other data points that you can pull in and so forth. And it was great to hear, Daniel, about how you utilize Life Skills Go in terms of pulling in some of those data points as well. I am curious, with that early identification in practice, as your role as a school leader, I guess, what does that look like from a day-to-day perspective in your school?
So I suppose there's various different touch points, and it depends. And as roles change and stuff too, I've used different methods, I guess. So one of the roles that I've used is, like I said, if I use looking at a Life Skills Go perspective, I often use being able to look at the check-ins and seeing how, if there's a student that's maybe checked in angry or something like that, being able to go to a, maybe call up a classroom teacher and say, hey, just want to check in with so-and-so because they've checked in different. So using that executive function there. Like I said, being out in the playground in the morning or on the front gate, that's another one that I would suggest is, that really early, okay, they've walked in and we can see there's been an incident, and that obviously starts, as Mark said, build that bigger picture. So what are the changes in behavior? So often those ones, and then sparking a conversation. So, we know that kids like to walk and talk. So, rather than perhaps doing that. So I go way back to my early days of my career, and I was an SLSO before I became a teacher. While I was at uni, and I used to go out and shoot the basketball or pass the football or kick a football with a kid. And at the time, I didn't realize that was actually a really good way of both regulating, because it was a pattern repeated activity, as well as actually just sparking a conversation in a non-threatening manner. So actually doing something with the student and, sparking those conversations and, really starting to unpack what might be happening, I think is really important. And I think it's super important for schools to have staff around. And I know that's difficult with budgets and time pressures and curriculum pressures and everything else, but I actually see that as being a really key part of identifying all of those students who are starting to disengage, and then how do we re-engage them? Well, as Mark said, that relationship's super important. So, like I said, looking for changes in behaviour, providing opportunities for them to express themselves, regulate, build some relationships, have key people in the school, so it's not just one person as well. So have, some safe people for them to go to, and then that again allows for, depending on whatever the issue may be, us to identify what's happening for that student and then put appropriate supports in place, which, like I said, could be anything, from maybe just having some toast in the morning and a bit of something to eat for our family, kids that maybe aren't getting breakfast, right through to, maybe some learning assistance or, dramas at home or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think certainly from my experience, often, regardless of geographic location here in Australia, often the breakfast programs I see as a really big door opener for some of those conversations between, school staff and young kids and so forth. Daniel, and I'm going to open this conversation up to Mark and Karen as well. I guess when you step back and, you've mentioned you've been an SLSO and, as a teacher and assistant principal and so forth, when you look at schools in general, not just your school, but other schools that you might work through or see when you meet together, what are the patterns that often school leaders talk about that they most commonly miss until the issues become something or a little bit bigger with students in terms of disengagement?
I think, look, providing that, I think sometimes we get, we've got the New South Wales Plan for Public Education here in New South Wales at the moment, in public schools. And I think often, we get so caught up with NAPLAN results and parent pressure. So I think across the board, regardless of, whether you're working in which system, which state, there's so many different pressure points for schools these days. And I think that goes across the board. But as Mark said, without wellbeing, without our students regulated, they're not going to learn anyway. So I think it's really important that, the schools where you can see kids have that sense of belonging, I think we're seeing, better results as a result of that predictability in routines, those sort of things, I think, a super important part of how that goes. And I think sometimes schools that maybe have some disengagement often sort of are pushing, let's say, academics potentially without having the wellbeing, support. And I think that's what I really have noticed. And I think schools are really trying to work out how can we support our students' wellbeing. We all know it's an issue, but how can we support it and do more with less? Because that's obviously something that we're all trying to do is, budgets are getting tighter. There's pressures on everybody to do everything. And we know schools are becoming more holistic in terms of those roles, from breakfast clubs to sporting to counselling to you name it. And I think that's where anything that we can do to support the wellbeing overall, and it's wellbeing of staff as well, and making sure we give them the training that they need to understand what's happening. Because again, staff come from all different backgrounds, and we all take our own little invisible backpacks into school each day, from whatever's happening in our own home lives. And I think it's really important to understand too that there are times that's triggering. So, where we can offer a bit of a check out system so teachers can tap out, if they're also struggling as well, to try and allow them to have that space, because we know that if you're dysregulated, they're going to be unable to regulate the student who's dysregulated as well. So I think, having a whole school understanding of that is really important.
Yeah, no, I really love that. Karen and Mark, did you want to add anything in terms of, the patterns that you might see across schools that can sometimes often be commonly missed until they're already something much bigger?
I think it's really leaning into the students and understanding where they're coming from, Sally. I think one of the things in all the data that we do collect in schools, we don't place enough emphasis on the student voice and what that actually means in that collective or that holistic picture. We need to consider that student voice isn't an alternative to data. It is actually the data, and it provides the context behind what we see in many of the numbers or much of the data that we're collecting. The poll right at the beginning of the session actually showed the variety of different ways that we're able to do that within school settings: attendance data, behaviour, wellbeing surveys, academic achievement. But the challenge is that often these are lag indicators. They're telling us something that has already changed. It's not presenting in the moment. It's not giving us the information or what have been those leading indicators that young people are sharing with us. And what we do know is that children often know that they are struggling long before it becomes visible in those types of things, in attendance, in disengagement, in their behaviour, or even in their academic performance. So I think one of the things that is really important through the work that I've done with schools is that we need to really lean in, and we need to ask children and young people directly, and we need to really genuinely listen. And when we do, we are well positioned to uncover some of the barriers that Mark and Daniel just spoke to. Some things that we don't often see, but we know they're really important. So things around friendships where anxiety is being heightened, some of the things that they may experience in terms of their online experiences, family pressures, and especially that one, Daniel, that you've really leaned into, that feeling of belonging, really important. I think the other couple of points I would make is that student voice should be seen or viewed as evidence alongside teacher observations, but also alongside parent observations. It's when you put all of those elements together that you actually get a complete picture, all three stakeholders in the one space, and those perspectives might be slightly different, but what they do is inform what the impact of any of those things is actually having on a young person, and then allows us to work effectively to not judge, but to respond earlier in supporting. Prevention begins with curiosity. It's important for us to understand what's wrong with a student, but what's actually happening for a student. And they are the ones that are closest to the problem, and often the one with the best solution. So when we lean into their voice and we understand what's happening, it's not just the what, but why is it happening, allows us to really respond effectively.
No, I do really love that, particularly, as you were saying and talking through the student voice, but bringing in the teachers and the parents and that whole wraparound support of what is observed there. So so many really great points to capture there, and I feel terrible only picking on the one. Daniel, I guess, as we talk about that student voice as evidence, we know that a lot of education systems, or across all three sectors, often do rely just on that once in regular check-ins with students. So how do you see the difference between that, as Karen described, the lag indicators versus what we're seeing as the leading indicators to help?
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones, and as Donna wrote in the chat as well, I think it is hard, between moving different sectors, and Jacqueline said in there about only seeing a class for 5 times in a fortnight, so maybe 5 hours and reconnecting with students and things like that. So I suppose there are so many little indicators and subtle signs and stuff like that, and I guess it is, it's a difficult job, and I don't think there is one simple magic wand that's ever going to be able to fix this no matter what, because we only have such limited time, in some cases with it, particularly in high schools, or, if you're doing RFF or something like that. So that's, like I said, for me, that's where something like I said, we utilize life skills go to capture that data, because then I can see it across all of my classes that I see, so I can sort of get a bit of a picture of how kids are going with it. I think, again, that individual part is, the way I think of it is, what if if every interaction with a kid could bring them closer, but also the interactions could bring them further away. So it's, how do we maintain the relationship, not by reducing high expectations, not by doing that, but providing that consistency for them. So, they're allowed to have bad moments, they're allowed to have bad days, I said, same as teachers and things like that. But as Mark said, not every time that a kid is upset means that they're suddenly disengaging. It can mean something, has happened that is upsetting, but it's also, just because a kid is happy doesn't always mean that as well. So it's just as best as we possibly can, just keeping an eye on what are those little things that are changes are happening. And for me, I know I rely a lot on my class teachers, to feed that information back to us as well. So, they might say, oh, hey, do you want to have a check-in with so-and-so because X, Y, Z? Go back a few years ago, we had a student who had a quite trauma background, quite a traumatic home life. He used to turn up with his sausage roll from the pie shop up the road each morning. And in the end, his morning routine was to come and sit down and eat his sausage roll, leave crumbs all through the office. But he'd just check in on what had happened in his, drama that may have occurred overnight. Sometimes it ended up in a manager report. Sometimes it ended up with a, no worries, I'll see you later on in the day. But again, it provided him with someone safe each day to check in with and do that. And, if I wasn't available, we built a small little team around him, so he had those opportunities to have those positive interactions. And then, my theory is always that, while I'm not going to be able to save every student, I'm not going to be able to fix every problem every time as much as I'd love to, but hopefully for a student like that, I'm hoping that he remembers that there was someone at school that was a safe spot for him. And then particularly around things like attendance, that for his children, he is then encouraged to send his children to school when they become thing, because he knows that school is a safe place, which potentially for him and his family, his parents didn't have that. So they didn't value school, and there wasn't a lot of trust built. So my theory is always, if I can do that, then maybe his kids might have a fighting chance. And then hopefully his kids, so the 100-year cycle, but they're actually going to attend because they're going to say, hey, school is a great place for me. And there was these people that believed in me. And I think that's ultimately how I think of the sort of the student wellbeing, in that, like I said, I can't save all of them and I can't save everything, but it's those little bits as we go.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And it makes me think of, the wings of a butterfly with every flap, and the impact that has, and how that potentially can have a really positive effect across and break quite often what is that generational cycle. Thank you for sharing that, Daniel, because I think that's such a really powerful story as well. And often as educators, we are faced with some of those challenges, and the reality is yeah, how we present each day can sometimes, we are that safe space for those young people. Karen, I'm going to step back from a national perspective and really looking at a national view across children's health, wellbeing and prevention. What are you seeing right now that you'd love for schools and the people on the webinar tonight to walk away with from an understanding?
Thanks, Sally. I think the people at the coalface actually have the information that they need. But when we do lift up and we do talk about things from a national perspective, what we do understand is that the challenges facing children are increasingly interconnected. From both an education perspective and also a parent perspective, we are seeing a rising complexity rather than isolated issues. Mental health, online safety, social connection, self-regulation and learning readiness are deeply intertwined. And from a school perspective, schools are managing increasing expectations while at the same time trying to respond to broader social challenges that previously sat outside education. And that's having a really significant impact. It's having an impact on the children, the young people, but it is also having a significant impact on the educators and school leaders in terms of what those expectations are. We're hearing constantly from educators that students are presenting with greater emotional needs and that reduced resilience is evident across everything, whether it is on social interactions, whether it's engagement with their learning, but generalized levels of resilience is low and anxiety is increased significantly, and trying to balance those space between those things to allow children and young people to effectively engage in learning is something that's becoming more and more complex. We're also seeing at the same time that what we know is that children are spending less time in unstructured play and have greater exposure to digital environments and are facing more and more competing pressures than any previous generation. We are in a technological world. The children and young people attending schools today are digital natives, but do they have the skills and expertise to navigate that space effectively? No. It's a complex space and those skills still need to be taught. And we need to be really mindful of how we are placing them into those environments and giving them the protections that they need to navigate those, not just the learning of those spaces, but the protections to navigate them effectively. Many of these challenges actually reinforce the importance of prevention or preventative education. We can't continue to respond only once a child or children reach a crisis point. We need to be providing those scaffolds, that education and the strategies that are actually going to set them up for success and reduce their exposure to harm, whether it be in any of those spaces, but also in terms of life in general, their social interactions, being able to navigate relationships and relationship building respectfully, being able to build resilience and a sense of belonging because they are feeling safe, connected and capable in a space where they know they are supported by the right mechanisms. So even though there is that growing recognition that health and wellbeing are really, and learning are all inseparable, especially for children and young people, we need to ensure that we are responding early. We are providing a really robust wellbeing strategy that is really invested in children's health and wellbeing, resilience, relationship building, and how they all contribute to improving learning outcomes, but we need to be doing it early. So many of the things that Daniel has spoken to about some of the really practical strategies that are being embedded, building that sense of belonging through establishing trust, where there is that opportunity to have a conversation. I did see in the chat there was someone that picked up the idea of we don't always realize that small thing that we did or said that made the difference. But as adults, if we make that time and that space to genuinely lean in, listen, and do that in a non-judgmental way, then those opportunities or that structure for those conversations to happen or for those skills to be built for the children and young people that we work with every day is going to be far more conducive to those opportunities.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of really great information there. And I think from that perspective as well, around creating those conducive opportunities, and picking up on some of these conversations in the chat that we're seeing, it always, I'm trying to find my words here, but I guess from my perspective, it's also around, we have so much complexity out there. And, and certainly in some schools, they're seeing a lot more complexity there with, the DCJs and so forth. And I'm picking up on some of the comments there around, we do often see with parents not wanting, whether they're moving into state or moving across different school sectors, whether they've got a situation that, they don't necessarily want to share with the school. It does make it quite difficult for teachers to understand what's going on in the background. And I think one of the other points is around, the parent side of all of this, and certainly in that digital education, digital literacy, how do we create those digital safe environments? I know we have our e-safety commissioner who's been doing a lot of work on how to educate and support parents in uplifting their knowledge in that space, because, we have these young people when they're in our school grounds during the school day, but they do go home or they do go elsewhere. What happens in that space? Dr. Mark, I'm going to pick on you if that's okay, because you do some work with parents in this area and you do help in terms of this conversation. What are your thoughts there on what else we can do to navigate this?
Yeah, it's great question. One thing I will push back on with what Karen said, and Karen and I know each other quite well now, so that'll be okay. We don't live in a digital world, right? We actually live in the real world, and we use devices as a tool. And I think that's something that we've really got to start pushing back on, because kids need to stop being on devices because there's an expectation that we are on devices to connect, and we're on devices to do all these things, and we're on devices to learn, when we shouldn't be. We should actually be in the real world, and we are most of the time in the real world, and that's actually where we learn best. And we've got to remember that somehow we went from being we've got to educate kids how to use technology to we're going to use technology to educate kids. And I think that those two things are completely separate, right? We can teach kids how to use technology, which is what we need to do, but that can be done in a very short period of time. We don't need to be using technology to teach kids. We actually shouldn't be using technology at the rate that we currently are. And there's a lot of countries now that are pushing back on that and doing much better in relation to resilience and anxiety and to outcomes and to all of these things. So we need to have a think about how much we're using the devices and stop thinking of as though it is inevitable, because it's not inevitable, and it's not what happens in a lot of countries. And we can do it differently. And we also need to realize that we're not happy when we're on devices. I do a lot of parent presentations, and I have a lot of parents go, "Oh, but my kid loves to be on whatever," and I'm like, "But what are they like when they come off it?" And they're not happy, right? And I always think of that song. What is it? If it makes you happy, then why are you so damn sad, right? And it is true, right? Kids aren't happy when they're on these devices, because as soon as they go off them, they're depressed and they're anxious and they're all of these other things. So we've got to stop thinking about this as though devices are inevitable and start realizing, and in actual fact, they're not, right? We know that most of the tech companies are putting most of their money and most of the development now into wearables. So, these devices that we've currently got where we're looking at screens aren't going to be around in about 5 years' time anyway. So why don't we stop that now and start giving the kids what they actually need, which is time with each other and making mistakes and learning how to be resilient and not having social issues that they've got, and learning how to process facial expressions and body language and interact with each other and do all the things that they're going to need in the future, rather than having them on the devices so much. And that requires both the schools to make a change, but also parents to make a change about the way they're doing things. Because it's up to us as well, right? I have a lot of schools who will say, oh, we have these bans in place and stuff, but we still have trouble. But then I'll see the teachers out there on the playground with their mobile phones and looking at their mobile phones. It's like, if you guys are using your mobile phones, of course the kids are going to also be using their mobile phones. So it needs to be across the board. We all need to be interacting with each other more often and spending more time with each other. And then we'll notice when things aren't going the way they should be.
Mm. That's a big call there, Dr. Mark.
That was a lot.
I only say that with my teenage nieces and nephews, because our son is a little bit older. I think it is a really interesting conversation to have, and one that is starting to become a little bit prevalent, and where we are starting to see some generations step away from digital smartphones and moving into more analog. Okay, so I guess we've talked about the national perspective, so thank you for that sharing, Karen. And, in terms of what is it, from a reactive to a preventative, because I think that's what we're really here about. What does it actually take for a school to move from responding after something has happened to genuinely preventing it? And Karen, you've got a lot of programs that you run across Australia with your partners and so forth. What are you seeing there from that perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting, Sally, because our take on prevention is that prevention isn't another program. It's actually a way of working. Prevention starts long before a referral is made or attendance drops for young people. It actually requires schools to really intentionally build protective factors, and many of those have been spoken about tonight. Those trusted relationships, that opportunity to embed belonging for a child or a young person, building emotional literacy, building resilience, and also providing opportunity for young people to develop help-seeking behaviours. Early identification means noticing small changes before they become significant challenges. And through schools and school systems, there is a need to bring that information together. So bringing together attendance, teacher observations, student voice, wellbeing information helps us to actually understand what patterns are emerging, and when they're emerging early, then we can look to what are the solutions or what are the strategies that can be put in place to help educate both children, young people, and also teachers and parents. This is not about one without the other, and it has been interesting to see some of the comments around parent engagement here. But prevention is about the education for all. A whole of community approach is going to be where the opportunity to increase the success of outcomes or impact for young people is where it will be most beneficial. It can't be one without the other. Prevention is also about equipping every adult in the school. It's not just your wellbeing teams to recognise the early signs and to feel confident about having those conversations or having supportive conversations, even if an educator or an adult within a school does not feel armed with those strategies. to start a conversation and then to be able to refer on or to seek the support that they know is available that a young person may not, and extend that support network for a young person. Universally, we know that evidence-informed education plays a really, really critical role. When every child develops health and social and emotional capabilities, schools reduce the number requiring intensive interventions later. So early and often is important. Families, as I said before, are essential partners, and preventative approaches work best when the schools and families share a common language and common strategies. And I do acknowledge some of the comments in the chat around often parents are disconnected or parents are reluctant to share information. That's an education piece that needs to happen, both for schools to understand the importance of the relationship that they build with parents, but also for parents to understand the importance of their knowledge sharing about their child or the children that they care for, and that exchange of information early is about investing in the right supports for their child or the child within the education setting that they are attending. So while it does require a commitment up front, it is important to know that early, often, and preventative education often is what reduces intensive interventions later.
No, I really love that, early and often, from that perspective. Nikki, I was going to pull you into this conversation as well, because you and I often talk about this day to day in the office. So please, in terms of how you see not just the evidence and everything that Karen's just referred to, but how are you seeing this play out as well in terms of the reactive to the preventative?
Yeah, I think it's I've actually been really quiet tonight because I've just been listening, because there's been so many, just like the polls, what we hear across states, territories, independents, privates, public, is this is one of the biggest issues, is the understanding of the words, and I think everyone said it tonight, evidence, best practice, student voice, belonging, attainment. These are all things that get used a lot. But I think if we and everyone wants to move towards, preventative, early intervention, there's these words. But one of the things with the disparity around all of this is, if I zoom out and I look at, the most misunderstood thing in education, and I can put this is from a journal, not from the world, according to Nikki. What is best practice around student voice? It's in the wellbeing, like the National Wellbeing Framework, it's everywhere. But the explicitness of what actually needs to happen, and I think we started with this, to begin to build trust, to then be able to allow student voice to be a protective factor. The evidence behind that, and I'm going to be a little bit very bullet point. The evidence behind that is small, consistent student voice, consistent, and the word here is consistent, that is regularly collected to begin to build a baseline. And I think this is, I just want to connect back to what everyone said tonight, because I think, Daniel, you opened up on that, that you're particularly, we can't rely just on student voice. We can't rely on teachers' observation. We can't rely just primarily as individual things. And Karen, you've said this around parents. The part that the evidence shows us is we need a baseline. And I'll use an example of a group of schools. So we work at just a group of schools that have 100 centres. Their variance in what a baseline is they have some young people that are constantly angry. Now, that's how they identify. I'm not going to, and I know, Mike, you and I have had, what we do when the emotions are expressed, but they know that anything above that or below that, that's a variant. That is a consistent piece of information that is coming in. The other part in terms of the consistency, the variance, is if we go back to the evidence of best practice, it needs to be combined and integrated, not sitting outside of daily practice. Because if we go back to what you were saying, Mark, around connection, belonging, feeling seen, if I, am putting something out there and there has been a change in my variant, someone needs to come to me and someone needs to check in with me, or there needs to be a trigger. And if we go back to building trust, here's this, the research is that, particularly if we kind of look at the research on school belonging and connectedness, it shows that young people are better protected, again, as we know, when they're known, valued, cared for, but more than that, they're supported and connected to trusted adults at the school. And I love that, because how can the inconsistency and the complexity of like a school with 5 classes, 30 classes, 40 classes, teachers coming and going, if I go back to the comments, but I only see them 4 times a week. This is where I come into, being able to use technology, not to take away from an experience, but to be able to gather evidence, and that data and that evidence is then lifted to ensure that we're not leaning on people. And our teachers, how do we give them, surface them information in the classroom to be able to ensure that they know that their students are ready to learn? How do we then roll that up? And I love some of the comments around, different areas of the school, or also the complexity of where our young people are. They might be in out-of-home care. But when we're able to wrap all of that up, we are able to begin to use not one central data point as truth, but wrapping them and having a system so we begin to see the individual, even in amongst a huge, big school, that will pop up for the right information for the right people at the right time. But that is a whole long connected journey that goes back to, and I think I wonder, and I'm not gonna dive too deep into this, but I think that one of the things when education moved welfare to the word wellbeing, I think there was kind of a mismatch, because now it gets, are we in welfare? Are we in wellbeing? We believe in wellbeing, we don't, but we all believe in attainment. And I think there's this wonderful opportunity for education around, well, where does it start? It starts a belonging, it starts a connection. How do we begin to share that? Sorry, I just got so excited listening to you all. And I think when I do ask people, and I do have the privilege of seeing a very large amount of data across a huge body of schools, often the response is, yeah, we have a paddle pop stick, that's our student voice, or we have a chart on the wall, or, and it's this inconsistency. And when we look at all of the complexity of a school, and then the connectedness of how do we then take that to the family to build engaging relationships, so we're both parties at the table. When I'm taking a student voice there combined, I'm inviting the family in to work with me. It's very different than the other way around.
A lot of food for thought there. Thanks, Nikki.
I probably shouldn't have sat here for so long thinking about it. I was like,
No. You do have that privilege sometimes when you are cogitating and listening. While you are talking, I guess, as the founder of Life Skills Go, I am curious if you would be willing to share. I mean, you've worked for so many years inside schools before you founded the Life Skills Go platform. I guess, what were the schools telling you that led you to want to build it?
Yeah, I'll be really short and sharp. I just saw the time, so sorry. So they were telling us, one of the questions that we were asking was, how are you measuring your programs? So we were a program provider way back when, 24 years ago or whatever it was, delivering social emotional learning. And the question was, how do you know what program to bring in? Because again, the buzzwords, resilience, this, social skills, it was like, we need a program to fix a problem. And one of the questions we kept asking is, how are you identifying that you need this program, and then how are you measuring it? Because if I give you a survey, it's going to be slanted towards me as a provider. And it's not going to be looking at holistically what's happening within your schools and how are you measuring wellbeing and how do you know how every young person is turning up to be able to gather the information. And they said every single one of them consistently, and we were working with a very, very large amount, the physical programs, every single one of them said, we can't. The current systems, and you've all identified it, they're lagging indicators. So I didn't build Life Skills Go. The schools built Life Skills Go hand in hand with us to make sure that we were solving the issue right from the classroom, from a teacher. How is a young person arriving in our classroom? Are they ready to learn? From the learning support, from a referral, what are they seeing when we're doing, in our executive meetings, when we're meeting across a stage, when we're in planning days, how do we have real evidence? And if we remove the word data and kind of, evidence, what is the evidence that we have for this beautiful young person so we can ensure that we begin to close the cracks and the gaps and begin to see a young person not dependent on a teacher, but dependent on a system that can support them, because it's not to take away, don't take away from the relationship. It's there to also support and enhance. How do we see every young person in amongst a huge, big system so that, every one of them is seen and responded and everyone has the same equal opportunity? Because it doesn't matter which teacher, if they believe in belonging or they believe in wellbeing, how do we create a system where we have processes to ensure every child is seen and responded to? And on the other part too, that teachers have the ability to to take the guesswork out, a lot of hypothesis, a lot of testing that they didn't have data for, and there wasn't a continuous improvement around programs. So thanks, Sally.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I guess, tonight we've heard a lot around how schools are seeing students, whether it's through the attendance, whether it is through lag data, through the annual student voice surveys that we see across all of the different jurisdictions. But also when we are standing at the front of the school gate or in the classroom in front of our students, we're doing those observations, and where we're super fortunate that we've got great relationships with parents or parents willing to share, being able to pull that wrap around. So I'm going to do a quick ask of each of you on the panel tonight. One simple takeaway that you'd want to share for the principals, classroom teachers, and the wellbeing team leaders who are on the call tonight. What should they think about prioritising from tonight? Daniel, I'm going to pick on you and start with you.
Okay, so look, I think first of all, that it's as just to reinforce those points, it's about relationship over first. Then we obviously can work on the regulation. So, need to have relationships. Students need that. I think Rita Pearson in her TED talk talks about every child needs a champion, and I think the more champions that we can have for kids in school, everyone needs someone different. So it's about building the knowledge across not only the teaching staff, but building the knowledge in the kids around, we do Dan Siegel's brain hand model for the students as well, so that the kids have some knowledge and words around it. And then the more we can build that knowledge across everyone within our school and families included, then I think obviously it becomes much easier. So I think we need to look at it holistically across the whole school. I said, find as many champions as you can on your staff, whoever that may be, who are the people that are really going to help champion the cause for those kids, and then start with there, and then hopefully, we'll all get better results for everyone across the board.
Love that. Thanks so much, Daniel. Dr. Mark, a couple of words from you.
I completely agree with Daniel. That would have been what I would have said. So I'm trying to come up with something else to say very, very quickly. I would say, if I'm talking to principals, I would say giving your teachers time to connect with your students outside of the curriculum. All of the teachers, all the schools I work with, the teachers that actually do less curriculum and more connection actually get better outcomes because they actually connect first and then they do the curriculum. So I would just say, giving teachers time to connect and giving them time to reflect on the students would be really important.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. Karen?
Oh, after the hard hitters, I would say that disengagement rarely happens suddenly. it's usually the result of small signals accumulating over time. So our opportunity is to notice those small signals earlier, listen more carefully to what children are telling us, and create school environments where every child feels seen, connected and supported before they disengage.
Love that. Nikki?
I think that everything's been said. My only thing is remembering that every day is such a gift. I think, Daniel, you touched on that, when I'm like, we have this opportunity and we only get it once. These young people are only this age for this day. How do I want to turn up? How do I want to lead? Because it is those small things that they remember.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah. And Donna, yeah, I was going to say that, but I just decided to be quiet. So what Donna said in the chat.
Every day is a day one, a fresh start. I'm not going to be able to add anything more from here in terms of summarizing. I think you guys have done such a wonderful job as a panelist. I do want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight and sharing your insights, your wisdom and your experiences. To all of our guests who have also joined us tonight on the webinar, every educator, school leader, wellbeing team member and a family, thank you so much for taking the time. I think we can all agree that we see that every child does deserve to be heard, seen and supported, and that every adult around them deserves the insights and the shared responsibility to make that happen. We do have one last ask for those of you who are still on the screen. If you could also provide some feedback in terms of this QR code, we have a feedback survey. This is really helpful for us with both, have we reached you in terms of connecting with the comments and the wisdom that's been imparted tonight for what you were looking for, but also what we're looking for in future webinars that you would like to hear from with different panelists. So I would like to take this time to say thank you once more, to wrap up, and wish you all a lovely evening ahead. And thank you once again to our panelists. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening.